This is a Grizzly G0947 8-inch benchtop jointer. This is an innocent piece of Peruvian walnut. Stay tuned to see what happens. Now, I've had this jointer for about 6 weeks now, and I've been playing around with it. The reason I got this jointer is I really wanted to get into milling my own wood, but I didn't have a jointer and I didn't have a planer. Now, I was going to get a planer first because, to be honest, planers have a lot more uses on their own than a jointer does. I saw this model online on sale from Grizzly for $425. That's an 8-inch jointer for under 500 bucks. Now, there are other 8-inch jointers on the market that are very similar to this, but they're all much more expensive. So I decided to buy this one sight unseen. I had no idea what I was going to do with it, but I figured, how could I pass up on an 8-inch jointer for under $500? So let's see how this thing worked out for me over the past couple of months. The first thing I want to take a look at is how it arrived. And to do that, I enlisted my demo crew. The box that the Grizzly came in was pretty substantial and worthy of the roughly 60 pounds this device weighs without packaging. And it was, for the most part, unharmed, no marks, dings on the outside of the box, but it looked pretty strong enough to handle some light abuse during shipping. Once I opened the box, you can see that the device itself was packed between 2 pieces of styrofoam. On the top were the instructions and a package of tools. Once we removed the top piece of foam, the actual jointer was in between, and on the bottom was where all the little accessories and additional things like the fence were located. So now that we have the Grizzly out of the box, let's talk a little bit about what it comes with. Obviously, there's the main unit of the jointer itself. There is an adapter for dust collection. We have a couple of push blocks, a hardware kit. Over here we have some brackets, a tool to install everything, and this is the back fence. Okay, let's go ahead and put this jointed together. The first thing we need to do is clean off this bed. It comes with a anti-rust protectant on it, and it's kind of greasy. I don't know how well you can see it on the camera, but if I try to rub, you'll see it comes off a little bit. Now, the instructions say to soak this with a good degreaser, like WD-40. Let it soak in 5 to 10 minutes and then clean it all off. So let's go ahead and do that. With the gunk cleaned off and a nice shiny polished, we're ready to go on to the next step. There are 4 small screws that are screwed into the back of the machine. We just need to remove these, and then we can go ahead and grab the fence bracket and begin to put that in place. The fence is connected directly to the second part of the bracket using these nuts. We'll start by just screwing them into place loosely, and then we can slide the fence extrusion over them in the next step. Slide those T-nuts into the fence. We want to make sure that this little cutout is face down. We're going to line that opening with the middle of the fence base, and then we're going to tighten it down. The top fence bracket and the fence are connected using ratcheting bolts. This makes it easy to adjust the fence by moving it forwards and backwards, up and down, and left and right. Now, the reason we want to make sure that this little groove is centered is because this gives a little bit of space to the jointer blades. So remember, this fence will be moved forwards and backwards across this cutting blade as you cut different size pieces of wood. So again, take your time, make sure it's accurate. You don't want to have an accident that can cause injury to yourself or damage the machine. With the fence installed, there's only one thing left to do, and that is to install some dust collection on this, and then we can actually mill a piece of lumber. This doesn't have any kind of fan to eject the chips and the dust out of the jointer. If you don't have something to suck the chips out. They won't be pushed out of the jointer and they'll collect inside the machine. And over time that could be a problem as far as gumming up the works of the inside, and it may even be harder to get out later on. So the jointer comes with a 4-inch dust board on the side, and if you need it, there's an adapter for a shop vac as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pop this on, and then we can test it out. Now the first question I had is, how does this jointer work straight out of the box? So I'm not going to calibrate anything, and I had the perfect project for that. My son was working on a gift for his Secret Admirer project for Valentine's Day, and while we were doing the decorations on the front where we were using torch paste, the heat from the heat gun caused the wood to cup, and then the top of the box wouldn't fit on the box anymore. So we decided to run it through this to see how fast it could flatten out that cup so the top of the box would fit properly. So if all you want to know is whether or not this jointer worked, well, it does. This is a good time, if you're finding this video interesting, to go ahead and like this video. It really helps promote the content and get it out to the rest of the world. But if you want to see me actually dial this jointer in and mill that piece of Peruvian walnut, why don't you go ahead and subscribe to our channel and support us and the work that we do and the videos we produce. All right, let's go ahead and start dialing in this jointer. First thing is to adjust this outfeed table so it is flat against the cutting blade, and then to adjust both tables so that they are coplanar with each other and also coplanar with these extension wings that come out on the sides. That way we know that it's going to make a nice flat edge on the bottom. I do want to say straight out of the box it did a pretty good job, but when I took some measurements it was a little off, so we'll go through the whole process just in case yours comes worse or over time it gets out of whack. Now to do this adjustment we're going to need a couple things. We're going to need a good straight edge. We're also going to need a set of feeler gauges to make sure it's flat. Because of the extruded aluminum and the fact that this is a benchtop jointer and the accuracy of the beds plus the accuracy of the feeler gauge plus the accuracy of my straight edge, I'm going to try to aim for getting a flatness under 0.02 of an inch. So that's the 0.002 on the feeler gauge. Once we set the flatness of the planer itself, we'll move on to the fence. Now there have been some complaints on the very few reviews I've seen on this item about the fence going out of square and needing to be constantly adjusted. So on this fence there are a few preset stops, and those are the ones most commonly used and the ones that people are complaining are a little out of whack. So we'll also check whether or not adjusting these stops helps keep this fence square with the jointer body. To make aligning the jointer tables easier, we're going to remove the guard. First, make sure the jointer is unplugged, then loosen these two screws and the guard will lift up and off. Before you adjust the outfeed table to the cutter blades, you're going to want to lower the infeed table a little bit just to make sure it doesn't interfere with your measurements. So we'll release the lock, and then we'll adjust the height adjustment to drop the infeed table down. Now when we place the straight edge, there's no chance of the infeed table pushing up on the straight edge and giving us a misalignment reading on the cutter head. The first step to adjust the jointer is to adjust the outfeed table so that it is flush with the cutter head body. To check this, we're going to use a straight edge, hold it flat against the base of the jointer, and then rotate the cutter blades. So if we look at mine, we can see that it's a little low at its highest position. So the first thing we're going to need to do is adjust these two screws so that we can close the gap between the edge of the outfeed table and the cutter blade body. Now this is kind of a tricky procedure because you have to go little by little, because when you release these screws, this plate moves a little bit, so you want to make some fine adjustments, bolt it back down, and then keep checking. When you're adjusting these screws, turning it right will raise the table and turning it left will lower the table. The easiest way I found to line these up is to raise it just until it touches the straight edge and then turn it back like 1/8 of a turn just to get it under so it doesn't make contact. Checking the X pattern by looking at the back, the front, the middle, and then on the X diagonals. In all cases, you should just be touching the edge of the cutter head body and have no gaps along the whole edge of the straight edge. Now we can check the infeed table to make sure it is coplanar with the outfeed table. We'll loosen this up again and we'll bring the table back to 0. And then we'll lock it back down. This process is similar to what we did on the outfeed table, but in this case, we're going to want to make sure that we don't touch this table that we've made perfect and just adjust the right side or the infeed table. The first thing we'll do is we'll take a feeler gauge and we'll look underneath the straight edge and see where there's gaps. So here I can see there's a gap on this side and it gets tight at the very, very end of the infeed table. So that means I'm going to start by lowering these 2 screws to bring down this part of the table and reduce the gap over on this side of the table. I just made a small adjustment on this 1 screw over here. We can see that that gap has not gone away, but has gotten significantly better than it was before. Now I'm just going to move slowly across the bed like this, making a little bit of adjustment each time until I get this right. And I'm just going to be adjusting the back screws for now. Once you get to the point where you still have a little bit of a gap on the outfeed table, but the infeed table is pretty flat and not showing any kind of gap, it is time to lower the front of the infeed table, and do this by just taking these screws out and making a 1/4 inch turn lower and then going back to the back screws again and checking. With the front lowered just a tiny bit, we can see that there's still a gap on the outfeed table, and now there's a larger gap on the beginning of the infeed table. So the pivot is now back again towards the outside edge of the infeed table. So when we lower the outside screws again, it will drop it down and begin closing this gap again. After going back and forth, adjusting all the screws, I was able to get the table within 0.02 of an inch on the feeler gauge. Now the infeed and outfeed tables are flat. All we need to do is adjust these extension arms so that they are also flat with the infeed and outfeed tables. So my table extensions were a little off with the tabletop when I got it, as you can see here by the wobble and the straight edge. These are pretty easy to adjust. There are 2 lock screws on the bottom of this. They just need to be loosened up. And you can use the same tool that came with the jointer. Before adjusting them, we want to pull this all the way out and lock the screws on the bottom that hold it from sliding. This is to make sure it's tight up against the table and there's no play in it while you're making the adjustment. So we'll go ahead and put the straight edge in the front, and we can see that it's a little low right here. The way that this adjusts is with these cams, which you can see right here. To adjust these, you need the Allen wrench that came with the jointer. Somewhere along the body of this cam, depending on how it's adjusted, is a little hole. You can stick the Allen key in that hole and then twist it, and as you twist it, the cam rotates and raises or lowers. So in this case, we want to just raise it until it touches the straight edge. Now there's no wobble. Once we finish that, we can go ahead and do the cam in the back. Set up, we'll just double check by checking the back. And we can use our feeler gauges again. And then we'll do the same with the middle, the front, and the 2 diagonals. We can tighten up these lock screws again.
The good news is the hard part is done. The only thing we have left to calibrate is this fence and the stops, and that's a pretty easy process because all you need is the little tiny Allen wrench that came with the jointer and a little bit of hand-eye coordination. Out of the box, my 90-degree stop was in pretty good shape. The fence was perpendicular to the jointer bed. However, the 45-degree angle was off quite a bit, as you can see from the combination square. So all you have to do to make these adjustments is turn these set screws and they push up against the blocks that make it stop. Once it's set, unless it moves, it's going to be repeatable. Now, are set screws perfect? No, I'll probably still check the jointer each time before I joint something, but it's nice to know that if I forget, it will hopefully be pretty close. Now, the moment everyone's been waiting for, and let's joint that piece of Peruvian walnut. But first, put the guard back in place.
The first pass was a little rough with the board sticking to the platform, but ultimately I got it to slide past over the blade and it moved pretty good once it started to go. Each subsequent pass went smoother because the board was getting flatter and flatter. It was about the third pass when I realized I had forgotten to hook up the dust collection, and that made quite a mess, so don't forget that. The whole process probably would have gone a lot easier as well had I just remembered to put some paste wax down on the infeed and outfeed tables before I actually got started. I was able to flatten the face of the board no problem using passes that were 1/32 of an inch and then move on to the edge. Now that we've kind of played with everything and we just kind of got straight to using the jointer, it might be a good time to talk about some of the specs of this. So this jointer did a pretty good job of surfacing, not only making this board flat, but also giving it a nice surface texture overall, even without any kind of additional preparation like sanding. A big part of that probably has to do with the fact that this has a spiral type cutter blade. Now, this is different than a helical blade, which has a lot more cutting edges on it, but it does have a similar kind of format of where these tiny little cutter bits are spaced out in a spiral formation around the drum. This is in contrast to something that might have a straight blade cutter head, which is a bunch of straight blades, usually 3, that spin around and mill the wood. The cutter blades that come on this are high-speed steel. They are indexable, meaning that you can take them and you can turn it around once. So if you get a little ding in one of these pieces, you can just spin it around to the other side. Another nice thing is that Grizzly does sell carbide tipped versions of these. Now, I don't have them. This is new. I might consider buying them and replacing them as the high-speed steel ones wear down. But those actually have 4 edges. So you can buy those and replace the high-speed steel. And you can actually flip those 4 times, not just 2 like you can with the high-speed steel. A couple other things you might want to know is that this jointer weighs about 59 pounds, so it's pretty rigid and stable when you use it, even if you don't bolt it to something like a workbench. The width of this jointer without using these extension wings is about 34 inches. With the extension wings, I would say that the usable length of the bed is probably closer to 55 inches. Other things to consider besides the fact that it can take an 8-inch board is that the minimum size board that can go through here is 10 inches. So if you're doing lots of tiny little boards, this is not the machine for you, but you can still get around that by using a larger board, surfacing it on the jointer, and then cutting it down to size. This is a single phase 110 device. You can plug it into any normal electrical socket. It also only draws a maximum of 10 amps, which is safe for most 15 amp circuits, as long as you don't have a lot of other stuff running while you're running this. This jointer has a max cut depth of 1/8 of an inch, but it only has a 1.5 horsepower engine behind it. I don't know if I would go on especially hardwoods that deep. In fact, I'll probably keep mine pretty thin. I noticed it started to bog down when I went a little bit deeper into the walnut, but I would say a 32nd to a 16th is probably pretty fair, and if it takes a few more passes to get a nice finish and still have a nice compact jointer, I can make a few extra passes and no harm, no foul. The length of this fence is just shy of 20 inches at 19 3/4. The height of the fence is not fantastic. It's only 4 1/4 high. So if you're trying to edge joint an 8-inch board, you're going to need to be a little bit careful and make sure that you keep it flat against the fence. This is also an aluminum top, so it is not cast iron, as is this aluminum extrusion, which is also not cast iron. There's also this nice safety feature right here where there's a removable key. And if you have kids like I do, you're constantly removing these to make sure that they can't use the tools and then losing them so that you can't use the tools. So luckily, you can also buy this as an accessory part. Adjusting the planer is super simple. All you do is loosen this locking mechanism right here. And then you can adjust the side to raise and lower the bed. And there's an indicator on the front that tells you how deep your cut is. So hopefully you like this video and you'll consider liking us down below and subscribing to our channel. Also, for those of you that have made it this far, well, I got a little surprise for you. I have an 8-footer of this Peruvian walnut I'm going to try on this jointer.